Contest chair, ladies and gentlemen, today I want to tell you a story of grit, determination, courage, of gambling it all on the toss of a dice, as it were, of facing down hostility armed with nothing more than a sense of humour and an unquenchable desire to see more. I want to tell you of a heroine. I want to tell you of Ida Pfeiffer. Ida Pfeiffer is a hero to me and someone whose sheer oomph is something that I'd like to emulate. Frau Pfeiffer was born in a time when women were supposed to be devoted to Kinder, Kutsche and Kirche, or children, kitchen, church. But instead, Ida Pfeiffer, having outlived her husband and having sent her strapping young lads out into the world on their own, decided she wanted to travel and then write about it for profit to fund even more travels. You can think of her as being one of the world's first travel bloggers. She travelled for the sheer joy of it and yet found a way to make it pay, something which I'm still struggling to do, I might tell you. Ida Pfeiffer has been called the first woman who made travelling her life's work. She became a celebrity, famous to the new mass audiences that the media of the Industrial Revolution and especially mass printing had made possible. Her books became international bestsellers translated into European and non-European languages. And yet, she was a relatively poor widow in a society that saw her role as staying at home, wearing the widow's weeds and remembering her plates. So what drove Frau Pfeiffer? Essentially, it was wanderlust. She'd been born into the Germanic equivalent of the Victorian era, and in many ways, the Biedermeier was like the Victorian era on steroids. A key concept of the Biedermeier worldview was the notion of separate spheres, that is, that men and women had entirely different areas where they were to be active, and that those areas were dictated to them not just by biology, but by divine will. So to do anything different wasn't only potentially scandalous, it was blasphemous. And yet, after living under those strictures for a great part of her adult life, Ida Pfeiffer would break out of the restrictions. After a loveless marriage, she was widowed at a relatively early age and was free to travel. Her first trip to the Middle East to visit the Holy Lands, and Frau Pfeiffer took in the places of traditional pilgrimage. But after seeing those holy places and shrines, she decided to keep going and took a side trip to Egypt and then to Rome, lasting 9 months before she returned to Vienna. Once at home, she sat down and in a blaze of inspiration, she compiled all of the notes that she'd scribbled in 14 notebooks into a 2-volume bestseller. She had discovered the formula that she would use from that point on. Stories of her travels sold well, and she then used the proceeds from those books to fund further travel. Her books were praised for their simple, matter-of-fact reporting, especially on things that famous male authors had neglected. Things like the life of women and families in other countries, if you like, the domestic realm of those faraway places that's been described. She had a keen eye for detail, and the books could essentially be read as tour guides for trips, whether they were real or vicarious, to exotic destinations. For example, she went to Iceland in 1845, and after an epic bout of seasickness, travelled next to Scandinavia, and then headed home again where she published her travel notes again as a book. After being at home for only 7 months, Ida set off again in March 1846, a much longer trip this one, circling the world. She boarded a Danish ship bound for Brazil, and when that ship hit terrible storms off the east coast of South America, she didn't cower below. No, she had herself tied to the mast so that she could experience the full measure and force of that tempest. Once, when taking an excursion through a rainforest, Ida Pfeiffer was suddenly confronted by a bandit who threatened her with a knife. So what did she do? She pulled out her own knife and stabbed him. I might say that after this point, Ida carried pistols in her travels. Up here for thinking. She even made her way to Baghdad, where she visited a harem. Now, that was something that no European male would have been allowed to do, and it was an absolute sensation for her reading public. Ida Pfeiffer then trekked to Persia, but before leaving, she had all of her notes shipped home because they were vital for the next book that she was planning to write. And then, like many an air traveller today, her luggage went missing. You know all those notes that she'd shipped home for safekeeping? Well, when she got home, they weren't there. And she had to wait and wait for 18 months. Every time I think of that story, I am so tempted to go and do an extra backup of my computer data just to be on the safe side. But eventually the notes did arrive, and she reworked them into her famous book, Eine Frauenfahrt um die Welt, or A Woman's Journey Around the World. Then, in 1851, Ida departed for London, launching what would become her second trip around the world. It included going to places that colonial administrators feared, like the western coast of Borneo. Then, one last journey awaited her to Madagascar, off the coast of Africa, where she became deathly ill, returning to Vienna to die in 1858. So what's the significance of this amazing figure? Well, Ida Pfeiffer helped usher in an age when even ordinary people could travel and explore. Those who read her books saw a world of possibilities opening up in front of them, a world not just the unique preserve of extraordinary explorers, but a world that they could, a world that we could venture into. And yet she was a widow of modest means, bucking all of the traditions of a hidebound society and not letting those traditions, those conventions, get in her way. That's why she is a heroine to me, and why I'd like her to be your inspiration as well. Next time you've got an idea but you lack the oomph to carry it through, think of Ida Pfeiffer. Next time you feel you need to conform to what society expects, just remember you can do more. When you're faced between staying on the well-worn path or striking out on a new venture, ask yourself, what would Ida Pfeiffer do? Because there are alternatives to the ordinary, and you owe it to yourself to at least explore some of those options. Now, I'm not suggesting that you should simply throw caution to the wind and pursue life-changing opportunities on a whim, but I am urging you to do what Ida did. Consider what's really important to you. Do a plus and minus assessment, and if the minuses are all about what other people will think or what's normal, then don't let them become a millstone around the neck of your dreams. Be like Ida and be brave.